What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be discussing the Stamina Templar. So the Stamina Templar still remains pretty much a mainstay in most Trials guilds because of their ability to provide minor fracture, minor breach through their ability Power of the Light. Due to the changes in Somerset, there was kind of discussion as to whether you want to run a Stam Decay with Sunderflame or if you want to run a Stamplar in the group in order to get minor fracture and minor breach. Now the reasoning behind it is it's a little bit more difficult to get 100% uptime on Power of the Light using a Stamplar versus Stam Decay running a heavy attack build using Sunderflame is pretty much always going to get at least very close to 100%, if not 100% uptime on that Sunderflame debuff, so minor fracture, minor breach. But after a couple of testing, few tests were done, it did seem like Stamplar still ended up pulling ahead, even though they had lower than 100% uptime on Power of the Light. So Stamplars are still very highly sought after in Trials group, particularly score run groups, and they do pull very good DPS, not quite as high as Stamina Nightblades, but they still pull very respectable DPS compared to their other Stamina counterparts. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, our skills, our attributes, our CPs, everything you would need to know in order to build this yourself. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about our rotation. So this is a static rotation. It is not going to be the best rotation for a Stamina Templar. There are going to be better rotations that are able to pull higher DPS. However, this is a fairly easy, straightforward rotation. It's fairly static, so you don't have to necessarily worry about kind of breaking your front bar or back bar rotation at all. At the same time, it does provide very good Power of Light uptime. It's not going to be as good as a dynamic rotation, but it is a like I said, it's a much simpler rotation to manage, and it still pulls very good DPS, at least when I compare it to other Stamplars that I've talked with. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started first with our gear. So Stamina Templars we are going to be running a light attack build here, so that's why we're going with Stormfist as our monster helm. Now you can go with Selene, you can go with Veladrest if you would like. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you are going to be using Selene's and Veladrest, I would recommend going with a 2 heavy attack front bar build rather than the 1 heavy attack front bar rotation that I will show you guys later on. That's just to maintain our recovery. So I have tested it out with a 1 heavy attack rotation with Selene's and a 2 heavy attack rotation with Selene's. And you can not really sustain, at least for 6 million diamond parts, it's a little bit difficult to sustain with 1 heavy attack on your front bar compared to 2 if you're using Selene's or Veladrest's. So I prefer to go with Stormfist for that additional stamina regen. So do keep in mind that we are going with 1 heavy piece. On this piece, it's going to be on our shoulder. And we do have a max health enchant here. Because we're doing a light attack rotation, we will be using Dubious Comoran Throne or the Water-Stained Psijic recipe. So that gives us some additional regen. So we do need to make up for that loss of health compared to using blue food. So we do have that heavy armor piece, and we do have a max health enchant here. Now for our first 5-piece set, so this is going to be the body set that's active on both bars, it's going to be Reliquin. Reliquin is a very powerful set. It's dropped from Cloudrest, so you will need to have access to the Somerset DLC in order to get this set. You can go with perfect or imperfect version. Depending on which set that you're wearing specifically, you will need to have all 5 pieces be from the exact same kind of set, so you can't mix and match imperfect and perfect from what I understand. So the difference between the perfect and imperfect version is the loss of that max stamina boost on that 5-piece effect. The imperfect version does not have that max stamina. The perfect version does have that max stamina boost. I am on the PTS, so the tooltips are a little bit different here, so don't really mind that too much. Your DPS is going to be pretty similar on live as it is on the PTS right now. We have all divines with max stamina enchants, except for that 1 heavy shoulder with a max health enchant here. Now for our front bar set, so this is the set that's only going to be active while we're on our front bar. We're going to go with the Ravager. This is a heavy armor set from PvP, so you can get it from Wars of the Worthy from Cyrodiil only, or you can buy coffers of this set from Vlastarius. If your faction holds Vlastarius, you basically can buy a coffer for 15,000 AP and it will have a random Ravager piece in there. Because it is a heavy armor set, we do need to use the jewelry and the weapon, so we're not able to use armor pieces necessarily, or at least it's inadvisable to do so. You can, if you do happen to use Ravager armor, you will need to use only 1 in order to maintain kind of 6 medium armor pieces, because we don't want to give too much up from our medium armor bonuses, so we're not going to go with 2 heavy pieces from the Ravager set. Now the Ravager set does give us some additional max health, so we don't need to put any points into health when we go over our attributes. So for our jewelry traits, we have 1 bloodthirsty and 2 infused. However, you can go with any sort of combination between those two, so you can go with 3 infused, you can go with 3 bloodthirsty, or anywhere in between. The DPS difference between them is going to be fairly small, so whichever trait you manage to research first and transmute first, I would just stick with that. And then we have 3 weapon damage enchants. We don't need any sort of stamina regen glyphs. We have plenty of good sustain with our regen, as well as the 1 heavy attack we're doing on our front bar here. Now for our weapons, I have a dagger and axe, and that's just because I didn't manage to get a second dagger of the Ravager set. But you will be going with double daggers instead of dagger axe here. That's just going to be higher, more consistent DPS on average compared to using a dagger axe. What's most important is to maintain the correct traits and enchants. So for your traits, your main hand is going to be Nirnhoned with a poison damage enchant. And then your offhand is going to be infused with a weapon damage enchant. And it's important that Nirnhoned is on your main hand because you don't gain nearly as much weapon damage from your offhand weapon as you do from your main hand weapon. I believe you only get around 20 to 21% of your weapon damage boost, or rather the weapon damage from the offhand. So you're not really getting 1335 additional weapon damage from this axe on the offhand, you're really getting 20% of that. And then for our back bar, we have the Maelstrom Bow with double Ravage health poisons. Nirnhoned is going to be our trait of choice. You can go with Precise if you would like. So the double Ravage health poisons can be made using Fleshfly Larva, Nightshade, and either Violet Coprinus or Nirnroot. Now, if you have a lot of stamina DPS in your raid group, because the double Ravage health poisons, both of those poisons count as debuffs, your poison can actually get overridden by another stamina DPS's poison. So in some instances, it might be more beneficial for you to run an infused Maelstrom Bow with a disease enchant instead on the back bar if you have too many stamina DPS. I have tested this out with Mayflower and with at the very least 4 stamina DPS in group. The DPS loss from all of you running the double Ravage health poison is pretty minimal, so you don't really need to worry about this too much unless you are running, for example, 6 or maybe even 7 stamina DPS in your raid group. So that's pretty much it for gear. Now there are a couple of alternatives here that you could use for the Ravager, and I have the 2 sets right here that I would recommend picking up. The first one's going to be Advancing Yokeda. This comes from Hel-Ra Citadel. This is a heavy armor set, so just like Ravager, you're only going to be using 1 armor piece with your 6 medium pieces, or you can go with just the 3 jewelry and the 2 weapons. Advancing Yokeda is pretty easy to obtain. You can just run Hel-Ra Citadel on normal for the weapons, and then on vet for the jewelry pieces, so you don't have to worry about farming or buying Ravager. You can pretty much just go into Hel-Ra and farm up those pieces that way. The second set that I would recommend is going to be War Machine. War Machine comes from Halls of Fabrication, so you will need access to Morrowind in order to get this. If you're going to be using War Machine, you will have to change up your bars a little bit here, but the overall DPS difference between using War Machine and Ravager and Advancing Yokeda is pretty small from my experience. It's about only a 1k DPS loss in general. War Machine is a medium armor set, so you don't necessarily need to use jewelry and the weapons. You can go with armor pieces instead of jewelry if you happen to get more lucky with your Reliquant jewelry compared to War Machine jewelry. That being said, though, you still want to have War Machine weapons. You don't want to have Reliquant active only on your front bar, because you will lose those Reliquant stacks if you have Reliquant weapons. So you will need to get 2 War Machine daggers if you want to use War Machine that way. So those are the 2 sets that I would recommend using in place of Ravager. They both have their strengths. Every one of them have their strengths and weaknesses. Ravager can be purchased very easily, but you have to upgrade them. Advancing Yokeda can be farmed, but you will have to farm it. And then War Machine, again, has to be farmed, and it's a fairly difficult trial if you're going for the gold jewelry. Halls is still one of the more difficult trials in the game right now. Now let's go over our character sheet. So I am a Red Guard. Red Guards are by and far the best stamina DPS race in the game right now. They get 10% max stamina, 9% stamina regen, but their strength comes from their third racial passive, which gives them additional, I believe it's around 750 additional stamina every time they deal melee damage every 5 seconds, and that's just going to be really, really helpful for sustain overall. If you go ahead and do the math, that ends up being approximately 150 additional base regen, or not base regen, but additional regen on top of what you have. So that's a really strong passive for stamina DPS, especially since we're doing a light attack rotation here. Other potential race choices include the Wood Elves, the Bosmer, and the Khajiits, as well as the Imperials if you have access to the Imperial Edition. Wood Elves get 6% max stamina, 21% additional stamina regen, plus they are immune to the poison status effect and the major defile status effect that's applied from disease damage. So if you intend on PvPing, I do recommend potentially looking at the Bosmer as a potential race, just so you're immune to the side effects from disease damage and poison damage. Khajiits only get 10% stamina regen. They get no max stamina boost, but they do get 8% additional weapon crit, so that does help out your weapon crit, but again, you don't get any sort of additional max stamina, so your max stamina is actually going to be fairly low as a Khajiit, roughly around 27k or so. And then Imperials get, I believe, 12% max health, 10% max stamina, and they get basically the health version of the Red Guard sustain passive, so they get about 750 health every 5 seconds they deal melee damage, so that's really helpful for sustaining yourself in terms of survivability, but in terms of actual sustain, Imperials do fall short compared to the other 3 races because they just don't have any sort of additional regen or a passive that helps sustain themselves. For our attribute points, because we are using the Ravager, we are able to put all 64 points into stamina because the Ravager does have additional health as one of their set bonuses. Now, if we are using the Advancing Yokeda set or War Machine, we will need to put 10 points into health and 54 points into stamina in order to get up to an acceptable health threshold here. So you can see here we're sitting at about 16.8, 16.9k max health. So that's pretty good where you want to sit at. If you do want to put a few more points into health because you feel like you're dying too much, then by all means go ahead and do so. I wouldn't recommend putting any more points than like 4 points into health. If you're using the Ravager, if you're using Advanced Yokeda or War Machine, I wouldn't put more than 12 points into health in order to hit 17k health. That's kind of, at that point, at least in my opinion, you're giving up too much max stamina in order for survivability there. Now for our Mundus, because we're not using the Twice Fang Snake set, we are going to be using the Lover in order to help get up to our penetration cap of 18,200. So this particular build is optimized around having a full raid group debuff sets active. So we're going to have Infused Torx Crusher, we have Alkosh active, we have our Minor Fracture obviously from Power of the Light, we have Major Fracture, we have pretty much all the debuff sets that we need out on the field. So running the Lover, we will be able to hit the penetration cap. Now if you do decide to use Twice Fang Snake is another body option here in place of Reliquin, along with Vicious Ophidian. If you are using Twice Fang Snake, then you will be running the Warrior instead of the Lover, just because if you double up with the Twice Fang Snake and the Lover, you will end up over-penetrating by a fair margin if you have all your debuffs active on the field. If you're missing one of your debuffs, for example, you don't have Alkosh, then it might be worth running the Lover anyways, if you are using Twice Fang Snake, as long as you're not over that penetration cap of 18,200. Now for our food, we're using Dubious Camoran Throne here. There is a gold food that you can get from Somerset, obtainable through fishing. That's basically a slightly upgraded version of Dubious Camoran Throne. You can't purchase the recipe, but you can purchase the food, but the food itself is still very expensive because the ingredients required to make it are still fairly rare. So you can just stick with Dubious Camoran Throne. The DPS difference is going to be pretty small overall between the two foods. Now for our skill bars, so this is with Ravager and Advancing Yokeda. I'll show you guys the bars if we're using War Machine, but it's a pretty simple swap if you are going to be using War Machine on your front bar. We have Biting Jabs, Rending Slashes. You can go with the other morph Blood Craze for additional heal if you'd like. Power of the Light, Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. We will not be using Flawless Dawnbreaker as our primary damage ultimate. This is just here for the weapon damage boost. And then for our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Repentance, Blazing Spear, and then you have two options for ultimates on your back bar. You can either go with Crescent Sweep here, or you can go with Ballista. Crescent Sweep will give you some additional cleave damage, while Ballista will give you just pure single target damage. They both pull pretty similar single target DPS, so I would recommend going with Crescent Sweep instead of Ballista personally, but you can realistically go with either of them, whichever one you prefer. Now, if you are going to be using War Machine on your front bar, what you're going to do is you're basically going to swap these ultimates. So you'll have Crescent Sweep on the front bar, and you'll have Flawless Dawnbreaker on the back bar instead. Again, very simple swap if you are going to be running War Machine, and that's just because you'll be using your ultimate on your front bar rather than your back bar. So you want Crescent Sweep on your front bar instead. If you are using War Machine, then you will definitely be using Crescent Sweep as your primary ultimate, just because it is very, very cheap. It's only 72 ultimate. Now, let's start talking about our CP. The CP cap is now 750, which gives us 250 points into each of the 3 different colored constellations. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Mooncalf, 75 into Tenacity. That leaves 100 points, which you can put into the remaining nodes however you'd like. It really depends on which sort of passives you want. For example, if you want the Treasure Hunter passive, you'd put 75 points into these nodes, and then put the other 25 into some other nodes. And it also depends on the trial that you're running too. Some trials you might be using Break Free more often than like dodge rolling, so you want to obviously account for that as well. Me personally, I have 40 into Shadow Ward, 31 into Tumbling, and 29 into Warlord. Now for our blue CPs, I will mention here again that this is optimized around having all of our raid debuffs, so Torg's Infused Crusher and Alkosh in our group. If you don't have any of those, if you're missing one of those 2 debuff sets, if you're don't have, for example, Alkosh, you will need to put more points into Piercing to make up that difference. So remember that the penetration cap is 18,200, so as long as you're able to hit that cap, doesn't really matter where you're getting your penetration from. If you do need to put more points into Piercing, I would recommend dropping Mighty down to 56, Precise Strikes down to 56, Thaumaturge down to 61, take the 2 points out of Physical Expert, and then you can drop Master at Arms down to around like 31 or so. And that should give you enough points into Piercing to make up for a good chunk of any sort of missing penetration that you have. Anything extra that you might need, you might want to consider running the Lover, or you might want to consider running a sharpened offhand weapon. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. But for a fully optimized raid group, we have 64 into Mighty, 17 into Piercing, 61 into Precise Strikes, 66 into Thaumaturge, 40 into Master at Arms, and 2 into Physical Weapons Expert. Now for our red CPs, I like to take a one-size-fits-most approach, so basically I have a balanced approach when it comes to mitigation, but depending on the specific trial you're running and how comfortable you are with it, you might want to shift some CP points around in order to best optimize your damage mitigation for that particular trial. So for example, if you're going to be doing Maw of Lorcage, where you're taking more magic damage, you might want to invest more into spell mitigation compared to physical mitigation. For the balanced approach, we're going 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick Skin, 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, as a Stamplar, I do want to bring up one passive that you might want to consider picking up, and that's going to be Field Physician here under the Lord. Whenever you're resurrecting another player, your damage taken is reduced by 15%. As a Templar, you do have access to the passive that speeds up your resurrection time, as well as give whoever you're resurrecting full health as opposed to half health. So as a Templar, you might be asked to be the first one to go for a res. In that instance, having field position is going to be very useful to reduce the damage you take, particularly as a stamina DPS, because you don't have a shield that you can put up before you start the resurrection process. In order to get field position, you will need to put 10 points into quick recovery. If you put 11 points into quick recovery, you will hit the next jump point. So I do recommend putting 11 points into quick recovery if you do want to get the field position passive here. Alright, so that is all of our build information, so now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, we do have a static rotation. So our rotation doesn't change at all. We don't need to necessarily break our backbar rotation to maintain power light uptime. So the exchange for this is we will have, on average, a lower power light uptime as a result. This static rotation does leave a few gaps here and there. It's not a lot, it's not a bunch of time, but you will not be able to get like 95 to 100% uptime on Power of the Light on a dummy parse with this particular rotation. So there are slightly better rotations if you're looking to maximize Power of the Light uptime. However, I found this rotation to be fairly simple, fairly easy to remember, and so we're sticking with this static rotation instead of a more dynamic rotation instead. Now, starting off with our rotation, we're going to be starting on our back bar. All of our back bar dots are very important to maintain. Endless Hail Razor Caltrops are going to be two very important dots. They're typically one of the strongest contributors to your DPS. Poison Injection usually doesn't make up as much of your DPS on combat metrics. However, towards the end of a fight, the last 15% of a boss's health, for instance, the Poison Injection ticks hit for a lot of damage. They tick for up to 10 to 15k, around that range, towards the end of the fight. So it's very important to maintain Poison Injection towards the end of the fight for those really big ticks that you're getting. Now, Blazing Spear might strike some of you guys who are new to Stamina Templars as an interesting ability. So Blazing Spear is actually a fairly good DPS tool for Stamina Templars. And it's not necessarily because of the damage. As you can see here, it's not that much damage. It's only 1851 magic damage every second for 8 seconds. So we're barely breaking 10k over 8 seconds. So it's not a huge DPS contribution that way. What Blazing Spear is there for is, one, for an additional shard synergy, so you'll be able to get restore some resources outside of orbs. We'll always have one out on the field, so we'll always be able to basically have resources available to your DPS and your tanks, because you are in melee range. You're throwing it on the boss, so the tank will be able to pick up your shard. But it's really here for the Burning Light passive. So the Burning Light passive, whenever you deal damage with an Aedric Spear ability, you have a 25% chance to deal additional physical or magic damage every half second. So that's why we have Blazing Spear. So it's not there for the Blazing Spear damage. This is here for the Burning Light damage instead. And so it's very important that we maintain Blazing Spear out on the field so we maximize our Burning Light damage. When we finish our parse, I'll show you just how much damage Burning Light passive actually does in the duration of the parse. And then for our front bar rotation, Power of the Lights are going to be the most important to maintain because of the Minor Fracture, Minor Breach. Then you also want to maintain Rearming Trap for the Minor Force, and then Deadly Cloak for the damage mitigation. So those are the three that you want to try to keep an eye on during your rotation. So with the static rotation, we will not have any downtime at all on our dots. Our back bar dots will have a little bit of downtime, but that's fine. We're still pulling very good DPS overall. So starting off with the rotation, I like to open up with a Rearming Trap. You don't necessarily have to do so, and if you're going into a boss fight, you will try to have Deadly Cloak up before you start the boss fight. You don't have to have it, but it's nice just in case the boss does some mechanics in the beginning that could kill you, and that does count as AoE damage. So starting off on our back bar here, I'm going to open up with Rearming Trap. Then we do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Blazing Spear, do our ultimate, and then Poison Injection. Light attack into Power of the Light, heavy attack, Rending Slashes, light attack jabs, light attack Deadly Cloak, light attack Rearming Trap, light attack Power of the Light, and then we rinse, ladder, repeat. So that's our one heavy attack on our front bar. That combined with our very good stamina regen is what's going to help sustain us. So I know I went over the front bar rotation very fast, so this is basically what you're going to be doing. So slowed down. Starting off with our back bar, you do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Blazing Spear, then you do your ultimate, and then you do Poison Injection, and you bar swap out. Light attack into Power of the Light, you do a heavy attack into Rending Slashes, then you do a light attack into jabs, light attack into Deadly Cloak, light attack Rearming Trap, and then light attack Power of the Light, and then you repeat that rotation. So this is a little bit sped up here. Ultimate, Poison Injection, Power of the Light, you do a heavy attack, then you light weave the remaining abilities, and that's basically the static rotation. So you will notice, so if I do a couple, let's do one flow rotation here. So if you keep an eye on Power of the Light uptime, so you do notice we did have a little bit of downtime on Power of the Light there. But going into the first Power of the Light, after we get out of our back bar rotation, it's pretty much instant, so you're not losing any time there. But you are losing a couple of milliseconds there. It's about like half a second or so there. Alright, so that is basically the rotation. There's not much to discuss because it is static, so we don't have to like talk about which dots you want to prioritize and when you're dynamically changing between bars. So fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Again, like I said, you are giving up a little bit of uptime on power to light, a couple tenths of seconds every time you're on your front bar. That does add up over a long period of time, and so I'll show you guys at the end of the parse just how much time we're actually giving up when we are using this rotation here. So we're going to do a 6-minute dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the amount of DPS we're able to pull here. One thing to keep in mind is that Stamina Templars do not have a native source of Major Fracture, so at the end we will add an additional 10% to our DPS, so that way we have a better idea of what you're able to pull compared to a class that does have Major Fracture built in, so for example Stam DKs, Stamina Nightblades. And I will try to narrate through the parse, but it is a static rotation, so it's pretty straightforward. Hopefully we won't have any lag spikes in the middle of the parse here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So you can actually start off with Power to Light instead of Rearming Trap if you'd like, so that way you manage to maintain Power to Light uptime. So again, we always heavy attack into Rending Slashes, but we light attack weave the rest of our abilities. And you can see here with this rotation, Endless Hail ends on our front bar, which is what we want because Endless Hail does inherit the weapon damage of the bar you are currently on, so we do want it to end while we're on our front bar because that is our higher weapon damage bar. And so with Maelstrom Bow, those last couple of ticks of Endless Hail hit much harder, so it's important that we try to end Endless Hail while we're on our front bar. One thing to take note of, not sure if you guys might have noticed that or not, but you can't drink potions while you're channeling jabs, so if you do need to drink potions, be mindful of when you're timing that. That's just because jabs is considered a channeled ability, and you are not able to drink potions in the middle of a channeled ability. Oop, I forgot my ultimate on that one. Alright, so there we go. That is our Stamina Templar parse here. We'll pull up combat metrics. We pulled 41.8k or so. So with Major Fracture, we're adding in about 8 to 10%, so we're looking at around 46k or so if we had somebody apply Major Fracture for us here. Now you can see here our DPS, Endless Hail Razor, Caltrops, all very important, and you can see here this is the Burning Light passive that I was talking about earlier, coming in at number 5 in our DPS lineup here. It normally pulls about the same level of DPS as Power of the Light here, so that's why we want our Shard down at all times in order to get those Burning Light procs. It's a very strong passive here. Stamina Templars are probably the only stamina class that can use a Magicka based ability to great effect because of that passive there. Then Poison Injection, again, while it might not seem like it's very important to maintain, if we take a look at the max hit here, we managed to have a crit for 16.5k. So if we take a look at our critical damage change here, that will translate to about a 9k normal tick. So you can see here 10 to 15k crit ticks on Poison Injection towards the end of a parse. It's very strong, so that's why we want to maintain a Poison Injection. Then everything else kind of falls off from there. So Stormfist here, as you can see here, combined the two proc sets make up about 14k DPS or so, around 15k maybe. So it's kind of sitting around here between like Blade Cloak and Rearming Trap when it comes to DPS potential for Stormfist there. Because we do have an axe, we do have Twin Blade and Blunt, so you are kind of at the mercy of RNG when it comes to that, which is why Double Daggers is going to be more consistent and usually a little bit higher DPS. And like I mentioned, Blazing Spear does pretty crap all for damage. Combined, it only makes up 1% of our DPS, so that's something that you want to take into consideration there. Now, one thing that some people like to point out is the fact that Stormfist can proc Minor Vulnerability, so you do get a little bit higher DPS when you're using Stormfist compared to Selene or Velodrats, and I do recognize that that is a potential issue, but as you can see here, we only have 11% uptime of Minor Vulnerability, and that really only basically translates to a less than 1% increase in DPS just because of Minor Vulnerability. So overall, not that important as a factor when you want to compare it to Selene's and Velodrath. And then, like I mentioned, Power of the Light uptime, we are giving up some Power of the Light uptime here. So I didn't use it right on the start of the parse, which I probably should have done. But 87% of 144 seconds, so 144 times 0.87, or rather times 0.13 I should say. So we're missing about 18 to 19 seconds of Power of the Light uptime, considering that my backbar rotation consists of 5 abilities, so we take out 5 seconds, so that's a total of about 13 seconds to 12 seconds of lost Power of the Light uptime that's accounted for. So that's kind of the downside of running that static rotation instead. We are giving up a fair number, a little bit of Power of the Light uptime. So if we take off the beginning parse there, we're sitting at about maybe 90% uptime in Power of the Light. So a little bit low compared to some other uptime with other rotations, but still very respectable nonetheless. Alright, so that is it for this build. One thing I do want to mention here, Ravager uptime, I had 65%. Stamplars, because jabs count as melee damage, you can have very good uptime on the Ravager. So even without Reliquien, you're probably going to be sitting at around 55% without Reliquien. With Reliquien, you're sitting between 65 and 75% uptime on the Ravager. So very, very strong, very good uptime on the Ravager with the Stamplar. So that's it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments about this build, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I will try to get back to them as soon as I can. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.